Thank you so much, Tanis. That was a great introduction. Really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone, and thank you again, Suzanne, Tanis, and everyone with the Alberta Ag Society group with Alberta Farm Days for allowing me and the other presenters to join you guys today to kind of go through the Open Farm Days. So again, I'm Thomas Ma. I work with Alberta Health Services. We will be going over basically two different topics today. Essentially, one will be comprised of food permits and approvals, and then the second topic will be basically working with your food service providers on how we can make a nice, smooth transition for your guys' events with regards to the Open Farm Days. And thank you again for joining us on a Monday. It's not always easy to, you know, it's everyone's got busy schedules, but we really appreciate you guys joining us here. So I will just make sure, I guess I should have made sure the slides work before I assume things. Before I begin, I'd also like to acknowledge that today we are gathering people here together who are on historical and contemporary Indigenous lands, including the territories of Treaty 6, 7, and 8, and on the homeland of the Métis Nations within Alberta and the 8 Métis settlements. We also acknowledge that many Indigenous communities have been forged in urban centers across Alberta, and we respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We also acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in a partnership with Indigenous communities in spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So with that in mind, we will move forward here on our first set of slides. So the first one is basically an introduction, a permit versus a special event approval. So we'll kind of go over the differences. A food handling permit is essentially what businesses use to sell their food to the public that isn't really covered by another agency. So in Alberta here, it's usually licensed out by Alberta Health Services. And think of this as like your driver's license. So if you want to drive a vehicle, you have to have a driver's license. So if you want to sell food to the public, you need to have a food handling permit. And the examples here are, and you guys are probably familiar with a lot of these in your communities. They can be restaurants, caterers, food trucks, gas stations. We've got usually a comprising of an application with a permit fee, similar to when you get your driver's license as well. And then we do routine inspections of these facilities to check on and ensure that they are in compliance with the food regulation. These permits are also not usually given out to home kitchens. There is obviously some extenuating circumstances, but usually with home kitchens, it's more there's too many dynamics, and unless there's a separate area in the home that's completely dedicated for the business itself. So, for example, if you have like a different trailer that you're using just for the facility itself, and it's completely split off from your main kitchen that you would use for all your personal things, then there is approvals given for those special event approvals. So this will be the one that we kind of talk about with regards to today's presentation, and this is usually with events all across Alberta. So you might be familiar with Calgary Stampede. There's the Edmonton Heritage Days. So with regards to the Open Farm Days, this would be another event that is all across Alberta, and it would go through the special event approval that would allow you guys to get like a temporary permit so that you can do some of these things, selling some of the products that you guys have on your farms here to the public. So both permit holders and special event organizers are required to follow the Alberta food regulation and stay in compliance with it. And we'll kind of go through that in the next set of slides here. Special event approvals. So as the event organizers, these would be you guys. You guys would submit these forms to us. There is generic emails on the forms that will go to your specific zones, which will go to the different health inspectors that cover your region, whether you're in like Peace River or if you're all the way down south and, around Lethbridge, or if you're in the urban zones like Edmonton and Calgary. When you submit these special event notification forms, they gave us the details of your plans. So whether you're running low risk food items will kind of regard them as items that you don't really need to refrigerate, things that would include basically like cookies and pastries and things that you normally wouldn't put in the fridge that can stay shelf stable at room temperature. These forms can also be found at the AHS/EPH website. EPH, short term for Environmental Public Health. That's the department that covers the special event approvals. And we'll kind of go through and take a look at that, what that website looks here in the next slide. The information packet details exactly what we may need, including your date, name, information, and all the other details. So other things that we would also consider regarding with your approval process, if there's bathrooms that are on site at your farm, how will people be washing their hands? If you guys will be having temporary setups, waste disposal and waste management, trash cans, garbage bags. They don't need to be fancy, but they just need to be available. Again, parking space where people will be situated, water supply, electricity, and other activities that you could have going on. Could be like face painting, bouncy house, a petting zoo, because it is farm related. We do get lots of those types of petting zoos across, and then we just want to make sure the setup is appropriate as well, especially when we mix any type of animals with food. We want to make sure it's done properly. So these special event approvals, they can be found on the EPH website, as I already mentioned earlier, and you can click on this link. I think what I'll try to do is maybe after the presentation, I'll see if I can copy and paste it into the chat box, and then you guys have that info as well. But it is pretty easy to memorize. It's just albertahealthservices.ca/EPH. But in case if you have a short memory, I'll try remember copying, paste it in on there. This is what the website looks like right now. I'm saying right now because it is currently undergoing a revamp, and it might not look like this next year, but it is what it looks like right now. So there is, when you go to the EPH website, you will be directed to this page, and they'll kind of have a section there for special events, community functions. There's one there for private events, bake sales, petting zoos. We're focused on the special event component. And then as you can see here, it's open to the public, including vendors who aren't just volunteers. So this will include festivals, carnivals. And then again, the information package that we'll look at here in the next slides can be found there as well with the notification form. There is an online one now that's submitted there with the new, it says online notification form. So if you aren't printing and getting the forms in, in physical writing, you can also do it online as well to save paper, or if people just prefer to do it so that way you're not, printing it off and then scanning it and then sending it back out. Yeah. And then again, there's other information here regarding food safety training and temporary hand wash stations. And there's some pictures there that you guys can have a look at, but it basically helps with your event overall. And then other things I would also include if there's other activities such as personal services. I haven't really dealt too much with the personal services side, but it does happen. Usually, I think we get the odd person doing maybe face painting or maybe hair cutting. That's been done in a few places, but yeah, those are the only ones I've come across, at least in my district. It could be quite different as well, depending on where you are in Alberta. So the form will look like something like this, where it will say, please ensure that we have 30 days, so that way we can kind of review the application. Please keep in mind the 30 days isn't set in stone. 30 days just gives us ample time to kind of review your package and give you information in a timely manner. Usually, even if you do it within 2 weeks, 2 weeks is great as well. We just prefer if it's not the day before, because yeah, then we are really scrambling, and depending on if we're away or if we're not even in the office and we're out doing inspections, we might not see your application on the day that it's submitted. And let's say you submitted it on this Friday and it was on Saturday, yeah, then you might not hear back from us. And then of course, by then, by the time we get the application, we won't be able to provide any feedback for you guys. So for sure, I think it's everyone's best interest to get it earlier than later. So again, you would fill out the name of your event. It would be some sort of open farm days, and you could put in your, first name, last name, event address, location, all that info, all that key information that we kind of know the date and times, when the event's running, where zone, which zone you may be located in, depending on if you're the north, Edmonton, central. So in this example here, we just kind of clicked off Edmonton zone. How many people you would be expecting for your event. This does not have to be an exact number. You can just, I think most people just approximate it. Even if you don't know, you can kind of just leave it, with a number that you feel like is gonna, be reasonable. 50, 100, 150. Or if you absolutely don't know, I mean, you can just, put in 1,000 or something if you want. So then, what type of vendors will be at the site? So again, this would be something like if you guys decide to have a petting zoo, food trucks, maybe you do want to bring a tattoo person and give out tattoos. Just depends on what the event comprises of. And then again, with your name, phone number, just a way for us to reach you, and then we can get back to you with any feedback. So pretty straightforward stuff there. How many toilets? If there will be any toilets there, temporary toilets, could be the porta potties. How many sinks, temporary sinks, hand sinks. And again, we want to make sure that whatever you have there, the information is accurate for your event. So obviously, if you have like 1,000 people attending it and you only have like one sink, then we'll probably make that recommendation to you to maybe rethink that and see if we can maybe either size down the event or see if we can bring in some more sinks, because otherwise that would be a lot of people trying to get their hands washed, and it would be a big conundrum and a big line to the sink. So again, other items there, and I don't know if we'll go through each one by one, but it's pretty standard stuff with the potable water, hand washing sinks, electricity. If you do have vendors on site, they'll just have probably their own dishwashing equipment. But if you don't, and you're just doing it yourself, then of course, how will you be providing dishwashing? No, we won't have dishwashing because we're just going to have, single-use disposable plates. So that way we can kind of avoid the dishwashing altogether. Or if you have no idea, those would be those recommendations. Maybe you decide, hey, I do want to try doing plates, but I don't know how I'm going to dishwash it. And then that's where we would make some recommendations, like maybe plastics would be the way to go. Or if if you guys think there's like people can bring their own containers, that sort of thing. So we try to help you guys out as best as we can, because we do want you guys to have a successful event. Waste collection again, making sure there's enough refuse containers on site. Equipment processing, again, this doesn't really apply because there's no personal service, but if you did, we would kind of look at what type of equipment they're bringing there to kind of process their personal service instruments that they're using. Vendors, again, vendors would include anything that's like a food truck here. So if you did have like a food truck joining us, then we would just have their information. And it's always important to see if they have a food permit as well to verify that. They should have a mobile sticker on their unit. So usually asking for their food permit and their sticker would guarantee you that it is a permitted truck and they're not just some, person trying to, or maybe they didn't realize they had to be licensed in order to attend the event. So there are those things there. Yep. And then the last one is usually like a site layout. You can include a layout such as where the parking lot is, where people will be parking, where the bathrooms, sinks, where your overall setup will be. And it's just for us to have a look, and then we can figure out where you guys are situated on your property, and if there's anything we need to be aware of. Like maybe we usually run a quick little scan on our maps to make sure there's nothing that's going to be an issue. So for example, let's say you guys are having cows or maybe some sort of chicken. We would check around the areas and check for surrounding wells to make sure that it's not going to be an issue for your neighbors, or if there is going to be other items that are made aware to you, like maybe there was an old site nearby that was used as a landfill site, and maybe the odor would be an issue for you guys or for the guests. So something like that we would just look into once we have your guys' information. Yeah, and anything that you can think of that we might need to know, we can always try to help you guys out. So these drawings, they don't need to be engineered or anything crazy. You could always try to get your kids to try to have fun with it too, and maybe draw little spots on the farm. But as long as it gives us an idea of where everything is, garbage, waste disposal, where the house might be situated in proximity to where the event might be going, in case if you guys have it outside and it's like a tented event, or if it's not tented, or if there's nearby trees, and just anything that might help us out in terms of assessing your guys' event, and that way we can provide some accurate feedback for you guys. Yep. And then once you do get the forms completed here, you'll get a submission thing that just says you'll get an email saying when the event was submitted, and you should hear back from us if we have any questions. So usually I submitted, now what? The submissions will go to our central email, which will get basically forwarded to the health inspectors that are in your district. So if you already know who the health inspector is in your district, then you don't even need to go through the central email. You can just, if you deal with, Mr. Don Allen, or, Mr. John Smith, you can always just email it directly to them. In worst case, if they're not the right ones or they're not with us anymore, they should be able to kind of direct it to the right inspector. But there is that central email on the forums there that will direct it to the right person for you guys, so you don't have to worry about who it is. Um, on average, it usually takes us about a week or so, 5 business days, maybe more, depending on when we get the forms and how busy we are in the summertime. But we will have a look and kind of make sure that everything looks, it looks like it's in a good event location. There's not going to be issues with anything surrounding the areas. And then, of course, whatever you have planned in terms of food, or, it might not necessarily be food. It might just be, a tour on the farm. We can make sure that there's enough resources, or there's enough hand wash stations, toilets, anything that might help you guys out. And usually, if you submit it and you don't hear back from us, it's not the end of the world. Usually no news is good news. It's like what the doctor says. You don't want a phone call from us. Usually if you do get a phone call, I wouldn't worry too much. It's probably just us trying to clarify a few things, like, okay, Mr. Smith, we see that you guys have 100 people and you only have maybe 2 bathrooms. So are we able to kind of bring in extras, or are we able to kind of, have it so that there's less people on site? And I think, you know, I know with farm days, I do believe people get time slots, so that might not necessarily be an issue depending on how your setup is done. So that's usually it will change depending on which farm you are and what type of event you're looking to do. So that way, if we're not clear on it, we'll usually probably give you guys a call just to confirm and make sure those details are accurate, and that way there's no miscommunication as well. So do I need a permit for our farm gate sales? So we're just going to switch gears here now. So we're not really talking about special events anymore. We're talking about whether or not, outside of the events, if you're looking to sell your products, whether it's fruits and vegetables, any type of meat product, so whole fruits and vegetables, products that meet the definition of low risk prepared foods. Again, this is items that are basically that don't require refrigeration. So again, we'll use the cookies and the biscuits and whatever else you think you can make that doesn't really require refrigeration. Honey is another one because we do see honey as more of horticulture, and it's kind of like in its natural form. So that doesn't require any type of regulation by us. So you can sell it directly out of your farm gate. And then there's also farm eggs as well, where they allow that farm because it's in the egg regulation, and lots of people grow their own eggs and they sell it at the farmers markets. And usually when they sell it at the farmers markets, they're using the permit under the umbrella of the farmers market. But in this case, because of the way the regulation is stated, you are able to sell the eggs directly out of your farm without that permit. Then we'll look at permits here again. So they are needed for inspected items such as meats. So when we're talking about poultry or beef, fresh or frozen, anything that's freshly cut, usually it needs to be labeled or stamped. Then there's also dairy products, so milk, cheese. I don't think this is news for anybody. So obviously when you go to the grocery stores, all those products have already been inspected. Processed fruits and vegetables. So this is where we are taking basically an apple in its fresh form, and we decide to slice it up, and then we are, turning it into like a candy apple, or we are adding or changing something. And even if it sounds a little silly, but the moment you put that knife into the apple, it becomes a processed food product. So then that would require a permit. Foods that don't usually fall under the definition of low risk home prepared foods. So those would be items that, let's say, for example, we made a cake that had a cheesecake frosting and it would require refrigeration. Then that would turn the cake basically into a product that isn't a low risk home prepared food anymore, and it would require a food permit for that. So I believe I got ahead of myself here, but what is a low home risk prepared foods? So foods that don't normally require the refrigeration step. This includes cakes, pies, baked goods, jam, jellies, pickles, nuts, coffee, basically anything that you feel like if you left it at room temperature, do I need to worry about it? Do I need to, worry that it's going to go stale, bad, or whichever? And usually with those types of products, when they're low in moisture or it's controlled by sugar or some sort of other reagent, then it's usually okay, and you guys can have it right out without a permit. You can sell those products directly out of your home without us getting inspected. Banned ingredients for these types of products, though. So there is a caveat in which if you are preparing some of these products, for example, like the cakes and the cookies and the pies, it needs to be pasteurized milk and it needs also to have pasteurized eggs. So you wouldn't be able to use the farm eggs that you guys have on the farm to make these products. Pasteurized eggs and milk are graded to a certain standard and they've been also pasteurized. So that's why those would be allowing in this type of preparation. So if you use farm eggs, then it wouldn't be really considered low risk home prepared foods anymore. And again, incorporating any type of meat, poultry, seafood. So we go from, a low risk apple pie to something like, like a meat pie, chicken pot pie that would require refrigeration. Um, then that would also require that permit. And it's not really low risk home prepared foods anymore. So hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a lot of information. Yeah. And then we will just kind of quickly go over this. And I mean, you can kind of go over this in your head. I'm not going to pick on anybody to answer these, but beef that was slaughtered. So would that require a permit to sell? Well, it's a meat. So let's go with the fact that yes, it's got to be inspected. And then you also need a food permit. Homegrown carrots and potatoes. So produce, again, um, those would be okay because they are in its natural form. Home canned Saskatoon berry jam. So this is a bit of a trickier one, but due to the fact that it is home canned and it goes through definitely some sort of a kill step, and then the fact that it is contained with a sugar and a preservative, it would, if it meets a certain percentage, then there's no permit required. There is other canned jam products that would require it, so salsas and other things that have a little bit more higher in terms of the risk factor. So with salsas, we're not just worried about the actual berry itself. There's other different ingredients in there, and as well, salsa also has the ability to change its pH depending on the fermentation and how you guys prepare it, and depending on the tomatoes. No batch of tomatoes is ever going to have the same amount of acidity when you guys make it. It's just one of those things where it just fluctuates too much, and those types of products would also need to get lab tested and confirmed. There's labs around the Edmonton area and the Calgary area that do the testing, and those would require the testing before those can be sold off. Mini cheesecakes and fruit topping. So I think for the most part, the incorporation of the dairy products in there and the fruit would make it so that you would require a food handling permit. And again, if you're not sure, please contact us. We are public health inspectors, so we're here to serve the public, and we're here to help you guys out when you guys need it. So hopefully this makes sense. And if my memory is not off here, I believe this should point us into the next section here. And I'll try to speed it up here. This section is quite a bit shorter, so that way I do leave some ample time for the next presenter. So working with the food service operators. So this section, we'll just talk briefly about food trucks. So these are usually mobile permitted facilities that are already covered by us. And again, this one, I don't know if I don't see the decal on here, but they should have a decal. Depending on which zone it is, it should be like an NTH for North, EDM for Edmonton, CGY for Calgary, STH for South Zone, and then CNT for Central Zone. So one of those decals will be available like a license plate. You can also have caterers on site there. They can come and prepare food, and they can operate under the umbrella of their own food permit. And usually they have approved food sources, so you don't have to worry about any of that. So this kind of just takes the food handling component of your guys's equation, so it helps you out with your event. So why would I need a food service provider? Great question. So certain situations require food to be prepared, high-risk products for customers to take home, for example, like sausages, foods that are being prepared ahead of time and being served on the farm day event. Do they have everything you want them to do? Be realistic with the commitments for the day. Do they have space, the equipment? Do they have extra equipment that they can bring on, right? The hand washing and the cleaning equipment and the waste disposal and the potable water supply. So making sure that all meets your guys' plans and your guys' needs. So what is your food service provider needs from you? So whether or not there's going to be a space requirement, where will they set up? Do they have enough, Do they have enough land space on there to kind of work their mobile unit in there? Are they going to have any issues with that? What are they doing in terms of, cutlery, napkins? How are they getting rid of their water, their waste? And then all their ingredients should also be, are they sourced? Are they pasteurized? Are they using dairy products? All that. So normally they do get inspected by us, so they should have all that, and they should have their own inspection reports and their food permits to kind of verify that with you even before you guys hire them. I would just ask for that type of information just to kind of cover your backs. Inspected meats. So bring your food to the food service provider. So who's picking up the products? So whether you guys have your meats, your eggs, your dairies, are they delivering it? Are they picking it up from the plant? How are they bringing your food to their whole foods and vegetables, delivery, the vehicles? We usually check the vehicles. Again, this isn't anything that you guys would need to worry about. This would be something that we would oversee in our inspections. But it's always good to keep an eye out. If you see something that isn't exactly right when you guys have their visits, you can always let us know and we can follow up with them as well. And you can keep those complaints or those concerns anonymous as well, so we can follow up. Like you saw them maybe not handling the food correctly, or you saw them maybe, having a dog or a cat or something in their mobile unit while they were at your farm. You can bring those concerns to us and we can follow up accordingly. What can a food service provider do on the farm? So um, they each have their own different kinds of permits. So just keeping in mind that different permits don't necessarily mean they can do the same thing. So for example, if you wanted a hot dog cart, they can't do a three-course meal there. They've only been approved to do the reheating of the hot dogs and, putting it into the buns, and that's kind of all they've been really approved for. So again, if you notice something a little bit funky with their permits, we're not going to go over to the different classes of the permits, but we would be able to help you guys out if you know exactly which cart or which type of food vendor you are looking to hire for your guys' event, and we can always look into it and kind of figure out what they can or can't do on your behalf. Can I sell a packaged product from a food service provider? If they produce it for you, they can definitely sell it and package it for you. So for sure, if you had some sort of buffalo meat, chicken, beef, something that was already on your guys' farm, because it is a permitted facility, and if the permit allows it, they can always do the preparation, cook it, and then that way they can also hand that out to the public as well on your guys' behalf because it is a permitted facility. Um, what is a low home prepared food? So we kind of already went over this, but they don't require the refrigeration. And again, we're just rehashing out the the cakes, pies, jams, jellies, all that. And again, we're just rehashing out that unpasteurized milk products and the uncooked eggs. Those are big no-nos. So you want to make sure that if you guys are doing this type of food preparation at your site, just making sure that you're using pasteurized products instead. Okay. So picking a food service operator, we always try to get them to have their food handling permit and their latest report and to confirm that they actually have their license. And yeah, and then again, applying for your special event as well. We've already kind of talked about that, making sure that the event itself is, notified to us, and then that way we can follow up and ensure that everything it kind of works out for your whatever setup you guys decide. Um, yeah, and so I guess the big ask is, why do we need to do all this? Why don't I just do it without telling you guys about it? Why can't we just, do what we've always done? Well, even with licensed caterers and mobiles, EPH still requires a notification. It's in the regs. Lots of people might have done it in the past because they just didn't know about it, or they weren't aware that it needs to be notified to us. I think it's becoming more increasingly apparent now because of the recent outbreaks that we've had in the past. There was a pretty big one with Campylobacter in Edmonton, and then there was another big one with E. coli as well, linked to pork a few years ago. But yeah, we've been trying to increase this awareness to the farms because there is an increasing amount of people linking improper cooking of meats, products that weren't correctly prepared. And of course, this gets a bunch of people sick. And then, of course, it links back to your farm, and then it's a pretty big fiasco. Um, so I won't go specifically into which farms were linked, but you can usually do a quick Google search. You can find those out, but it helps us out because then we can kind of run through the events with you guys and hopefully moving forward. This is great for yourselves and obviously for fellow Albertans as well, because we want to make sure everybody is kept healthy and safe. Yeah, and then I think that's it. Sorry about the little rush there at the end there. I was looking at my clock and I was like, hey, but thanks everybody. I will, yes, I'll just take me off my sharing and I'll pass it off to Perry here. Stop sharing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Thomas. So we do have a bunch of questions for you in the chat. And what I would like to say is, Alberta Health Services have been so incredibly helpful with our farms and working directly with them to help, help everyone kind of get up to speed. And I will say a lot of people that have gone through the process for the first time found it a little daunting putting the maps together and the other stuff. But what's wonderful is once they figured out how to do it, they've been having a lot of fun, being able to sell their own farm products, having yak chili, having all sorts of wonderful things on the farms. So, we're so thrilled with it. So thank you. I'm going to run through our questions quickly and everything from sort of soup to nuts here. So do you have a special requirement of the amount of parking per forecasted guests?
So we're usually not too picky with the parking. I think there is like a building code for the amount of space allocated, but I think as long as it's reasonable and if the farm has the space for it and it's not going to be like an issue like blocking somebody else in, or if there's like an emergency and somebody needs to like get out right away because they have to rush home because maybe they're maybe their expected mother is heading to the hospital, as long as it's not like blocking entrance or something. But no, we're not usually. And the maps and the layouts, that will help us out too, because then we can kind of figure out like, are you comfortable with people like going off your, whatever the designated space off if they decide to, park somewhere that might be like maybe it'll damage some of the nearby agriculture, or if there's issues or something like that. And of course, keep in mind with regards to the parking, and I think a lot of people don't realize as well, is where depending on where you do park, there's going to be a lot of cars running, and of course the gas and the fumes. So we generally try to aim for those spots to kind of be further away from the house, especially if there's like a day that's kind of windy and you don't even realize it, but people might be, starting the cars on and maybe we're still in winter mode and everyone's just leaving the car running for 30 minutes. So you might get a huge hint of fumes in the home. So obviously you want to make sure it's kind of further away and it's not going to be like towards your air intake on the homes nearby. But generally for space, we don't run issues into that. Usually it's more like where they want to park and it's away from, like I said, maybe chickens and cows are in the area and they want to make sure they don't get gassed, right? Especially with diesel. I think diesel is kind of the bad ones. But yeah, generally from an air quality standpoint, we're more concerned about that than the space requirements. And sorry, I hope that answered that question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And hopefully in August, we don't have people running their vehicles too long, but you never know.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
Okay, so next question, and we have this one every year. So for open farm days, we do have like a registration system. So our farms, particularly some of the smaller ones, can limit visitation. So, and they can also space it. So we can say, I want no more than sort of 30 people here in every 2-hour time zone. So people will come in for 10 o'clock, they'll be gone by noon, and you've got a new intake. So when people are taking a look, they never expect to have more than, say, 30 people on their farm at a time. But through the course of the full weekend, can have up to sort of 400 people still without exceeding that 30 per time. So when you're filling out those forms, what kind of numbers are you looking for in terms of, numbers that you expect? Understanding that sort of washrooms and other things are also based on that number.
So that is such a great question, and you're right. I think I get this one almost every year. Like,
Yeah.
it's too ambiguous. I know the special event forms are going through some changes. So again, we
Okay.
might see some changes with that, but that's generally one that we keep coming across because you're absolutely right. Where it's like, okay, well, how many people are you expecting for the event? And then you're like, wait, am I putting like 30 per day, 30 per session? And it can be a little confusing because when you're putting those washrooms and the hand sinks down, they might not correspond exactly to what the event is underlining. So, I mean, obviously, if you have like 2 toilets and 2 hand sinks and you've only got the 30 people, it probably would be fine because it's spaced out and it's great. But then if you look at it and someone put like 1,000 people and then you only have the 2 hand sinks and the toilets, yeah, you'll be like, okay, clearly there's something off here. So those are generally things that the inspectors would follow up with to check, and I think most of them usually when they see that something's not adding up. But I would say for the guys that are filling out the forms, there are some areas where you can kind of put in some notes and you can kind of put that in there so they know. Like when you put the event in and it's like saying event details, you can generally put like, okay, we're going to be looking at some poultry and some beef and some other products there for that day. And then, as you get the information down, we're going to have low risk prepared foods. We're going to have, some cookies with some, beef on a stick or something like that. And then generally afterwards, you can put something on there like, oh, we are generally going to have staggered events here. We're going to try to have 3 or 4 sessions per day, ranging by about 10, 15 people per session. And, you can put always like, hopefully the toilet slash hand wash is adequate enough. And we can always follow up accordingly, but it helps us out because if they see that information there, then that's one question they don't have to ask you guys when they follow up because then it's already on that form for you. So generally, I find that the more information that's on there, it helps us out. So that's why
Yeah.
a lot of people like the freehand forms. So the ones online, it's kind of crappy because it's like stuck on a certain thing and you have to like write it out the way it wants you to write. But when you do
Mhm.
the forms and fill it out by hand, you can like put all these little notes on the side of it. And we generally won't mind that because we're like, well, you know what? That's pretty good. And where else can you put that spot, right? So like with the 500 people, you can put 500 people and then you could just put a little arrow and say, 30 per, session and whichever, right? So that's
Right.
what I usually find. And there's people like that are familiar with the forms and they've kind of gotten around that. But the first time people that are doing the forms for the first time, they're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. Like this is kind of confusing. So but
Wonderful.
yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Wonderful. We have a U-Pick. If we want to submit a form for open farm days, but it falls during a U-Pick time, which we also want to do another event, do I submit two forms or do I put them together as one?
So generally speaking, if it's just you pick and they're just sticking with produce, you don't even need to worry about the forms for that. It's produce, it's
Yep.
in its natural form. Yep, that's fine. Don't worry about the extra form there. And on the other form, if they're doing the special event form, you can always generally mention it. You can say like, oh, we also have a U pick that's happening at the same time. Again, more information doesn't hurt us. It does help because then they can kind of figure out like, okay, wait, where is this U pick? Like, is the parking and the other things going to be an issue and where it's proximity and are they going to be trying to is everybody going to be trying to race to the bathrooms and whatnot. So it definitely helps to mention it, but I generally wouldn't fill two forms for that because that's just redundant, and then of course it's going to be confusing because they're going to be figuring out like why is there two forms for an event that's kind of around the same time because then people will get confused. But
Right.
you can
So
mention
one of
that you pick. Yeah, I would just
yeah,
stick with the one form.
one form and cover off everything that you happen to be doing. Okay, great. I've got another question about food handling. So we've got one farm that's doing honey lollipops, and they've been able to make them in an approved kitchen with a food handling certificate. Um, but then an inspector mentioned that that might be wrong now. So can you provide a little bit of clarity? So you're using a product which is falls under the something that really actually doesn't require a permit for the lollipops. But does it depend on where you're selling them? What that sort of inspection and commercial kitchen looks like? So, like a honey lollipop would be a low risk food item because it's a
Yeah, yeah,
candy.
that is a good question. So if they're already inspected, and then they're just, I think maybe if there was maybe a miscommunication on how the product was approved, I would still go back to the lowest home prepared foods document, which actually I think what I can do is I can just see if I can link that here for you guys, so you
Okay.
guys can have it here as well. I'll do that after I link those other ones that I said I was. I'll do it maybe during the other presenters, so then that way I'm not trying to slow you guys down right now. But as for the question itself, so if they're selling the lollipops directly out of their home, it doesn't matter if they have a permit or not. That's absolutely allowed. It would be if they are permitted and they're inspected, and they want to sell the lollipops like out of a gas station, out of a grocery store, then those
Yes.
products would need a permit there for that part. But for the farm days itself, because it is a special event, regardless or not if they're doing home risk prepared foods or low risk, they would still be able to sell it there from their farm. So if that's the issue, like if that's the question, there shouldn't be any issues there. It's just if they're trying to sell it out of a gas station or of a grocery
Yeah.
store, then they would need to see their permit. And of course, even with that, I wouldn't say it's anything. too concerning. It's pretty low risk, and as long as it's not, it's labeled and it's got the appropriate amount of information there for the public, it shouldn't be an issue there for the sale of it. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
I hope that
Joanne, if
answers.
you,
Yeah, I hope if I need to re-clarify, I can as well. Sorry.
yeah, Joanne, and you're welcome to unmute if you want to ask anything specific about that one. I'll move on to the next question, but feel free to unmute and we can jump in. Somebody asked a question about washrooms, so I will send out, we have the guidebook on that one, so I'll send out that directly. And the washrooms are based on the number of people at a specific time. So I'll just kind of put that one out. Saskatoon made into syrup would fall under the same criteria as jams and jellies, as low risk and sold on the farm. Can we put on a barbecue without using a food service provider? And what would we need to cook hamburgers and hot dogs? So things that have been inspected. What would a farm need to do to be able to sell those inspected meats as a hamburger on site?
So, with regards to the inspected meats, as long as they've got the labels, like I got, I went to Costco, and I got a whole pack of, the Costco burgers. I've kept my receipts and I've got all that information in case the inspector requires it. They should be able to operate the barbecue. Yep, as long as they've got like, the requirements there. So usually with that, as long as they've got like a little station to wash their hands, the equipment's clean and not rusting and anything like that. They can send pictures and show their setup as well, and it helps the inspectors out. But normally speaking, with hot dogs, burgers, those are allowed, and that's why the special events are here. It's
Yep.
to kind of give you guys a little bit of wiggle room with the it seems almost silly for you to pay for a permit fee just so you can operate for your event and then be done with it for for the remainder of the year. So they allow that with the special event forms where they'll give you guys access. And again, just having all that information. Oh, I'm gonna be doing some barbecue hot dogs and burgers and buns are on the side there. And then I'll have, gloves, the temporary hand stations, and when I talk about temporary hand stations, we're not talking about anything crazy. I'll see if I can send a picture as well. I'll kind of keep parameters of the hand station. Yeah, it's just, I bet the best way to kind of visualize it is just imagine one of those like coffee urns, or if you have like one of those big water dispensers you get from the store, like the jug, and really you just have that set up in a little bucket to catch the water and some soap nearby. That's your guys' temporary hand station, right? We're not expecting you guys to plumb some sinks and, a five-star Michelin restaurant plumbed in sink. That would be crazy. But just so something you guys can get the grit and the dirt off your hands, or if in case you touch the raw meat, just something you guys can use quickly without running back into the house, because I imagine most people will probably be more than a good amount of 10, 20 steps. I think requirements require the 12 steps or less for the hand sink. So as long as that hand sink is within, 5, 6 steps, 8 steps, it should be a pretty good distance. You can slap it on the back of your tailgate if it's easier, as well. But just whatever your setup is, and as long as you have all that information and you've drawn it out for us, it gives us an idea of how you guys will be setting up as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers your question there with the food
Yeah. And I think
component
really
there.
what you're looking for, you want to know how things are going to be kept cold, how you're going to be heating them, cleaning supplies that you're going to use. So it's just making sure that that food product is safe. So it's
Yep,
absolutely
yep,
doable.
exactly.
But we do need that. And then I've got another question. Had applied for a special event permit 2 months out before the event last year and didn't hear back. I called, I emailed, still no answer. 2 weeks from the event, we decided not to go ahead. What should we have done?
Oh, okay. That's a good one, because I do feel like that's not the first time I've heard of that. So definitely
Yeah.
for sure I understand the frustration. We get a million events every year, and I do feel like so there's definitely a couple of different channels. I think one of the best channels is use Tanis and Suzanne here as a resource. If you guys can't get a hold of us, reach out to one of them. They'll reach out to me directly, and then what I'll do is I'll try to work my magic and figure out what happened with that event application. And I do believe there was one last year, or maybe a couple, that got missed, and we had to kind of give some people some nudges. So we did have to go through that route. And they might have just been on vacation, or they went on a leave or something, and then somehow just kind of got slipped under the cracks. So I do apologize for that. We're not we're human. We're not perfect. I've missed a couple, and like I said, it happens, and when you do, you feel pretty bad about it. So I do feel like using me or Tanis here as resources for you guys. We're here to help make sure the event goes smoothly, and we feel really bad if you're kind of waiting for our approval, or if you're waiting to hear back from us and you haven't heard anything, then that's just obviously you're in the dark, and we don't want to keep people in the dark. So I apologize again for that. But we will try to do our best here, to try to stay on top of it, because like I said, it's always changing, and it always feels like it's a pretty big events that are coming in through the summer. And I think we do try to tend to focus our attention on more of the bigger ones, and some of the smaller ones like the farm days kind of get missed. So again, apologies, and we'll, like I said already, reaching out to one of us here is your best course. And even if you give me the information, date, time on when you guys submitted it, I can look for it. I can figure out what's going on here, and I can talk to the inspector that should have touched base with you, and if figure out maybe they're on vacation, maybe they're away, and we can kind of figure out what happened there. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. And one last question. Can you tell the difference between a provincially and federally inspected meats, and if there's any different regulations around those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it all depends on so federally, the beef and the poultry, they generally do a lot more of the inspections. So that's covered by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They go through all the big factories and the big production companies, and they kind of do their visits and do they're basically, they license them and they kind of approve and make sure that the meat is up to grade. For the provincial level, we also have our own meat inspectors that go alongside with the Canadian food guys. It all depends on the circumstances. So the best example here I can use is um, the meat that you guys get at the grocery store. So the beef, the chicken, let's just use Costco here as an example because I keep bringing them up. I'm not trying to promote them, by the way. But just Costco's easy because I think everybody goes there. Um, they have a lot of products that are from across province. So the moment it's across province and it's coming from a different area in Canada, that falls directly under CFIA, and they're the ones that govern their inspections over there. If you're looking at like a local shop in Edmonton where they're doing like their own sausage, and they've got their own little farms, and they've done their own little their poultry, and they're trying to do their own sausage, and they're trying to get it sold there. The best one I'll use there, because I kind of go there quite a bit, is called Muleys. They would be provincially inspected by us and with AHS as well. But the moment they decide, hey, we're going to ship these products out to Ontario, they would also get the food inspection guys involved, because then labeling and licensing would also require that when it crosses borders. So that's the best way I can look at it. But essentially, we all kind of do similar jobs, and we all work together. Whether it's a product that we've never seen before and it comes into our province, and we're like, hey, where's this product coming from? And we might collaborate with some of the Ontario inspectors and figure out what's going on there. But then we would always rope in CFIA, and of course, Health Canada gets involved as well, depending on what types of products. But it's a big collaboration by everybody, and those would be the main differences. When you're focused on the open farm days, it's more localized, and that's why we have these special event forms. Um, and the moment I guess you decide, hey, I'm gonna ship my meat out to maybe to Saskatchewan, then it would be involving the CFIA guys, and they might come and have a chat with you, and that would also require a different license. But again, generally speaking, I don't find that being too big of an issue in our province. It seems like everybody is pretty localized here. I think the one big one we run into the most is obviously what everyone knows about the border between Lloydminster. And it's just because of the cross province that they do run into the sides of both the Alberta and the Saskatchewan and
Yeah.
CFIA inspectors. So everybody gets involved there. So thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Thomas. Absolutely appreciate it. And we'll move over. If there are more questions, you can feel free to contact Thomas directly or send anything you like through me, and happy to get answers to your questions. So next we're going to move over to Perry Kramer, who's joining us, and he is Vice President of Client Services with NFP. And NFP is our insurance provider for Open Farm Days. So Suzanne will be passing controls over to him to share his presentation, and we'll learn a little bit about what Open Farm Days is doing with insurance for this year. and taking things from there. They have been our long-term service provider, and yeah. So welcome, Perry.
Thanks for the intro, Tanis. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear.
Great, thanks. So that was a great presentation. I actually learned a bit there too, so I'm glad I tuned in for some of that. It's nice to hear all the instruction and rules and regulations from the government side. So today we're going to talk about the insurance and risk management factors for open farm days and the overlap with your farm insurance and what's covered, what's not covered. So again, I'm NFP, I'm Perry with NFP. We've been the broker for open farm days since inception. I'm not sure exactly which year we're on, but we've gone back a handful of years now. So we work with farms all across the province. Alberta, Saskatchewan are our primary areas of focus. We have office in BC as well. And we're in Edmonton. And again, if you want to get in touch with me, I'll have my contact information at the end of the presentation. So it's a little bit about me. I've been with NFP. This is my 14th year. Previously Foster Park Brokers, Foster Park Basket, if you know that name from the past. That's the same. We're the same folks who went through a rebrand 2 years ago. And we may change our name here again in the next couple of years, but for now we are working under NFP insurance. So when it comes to open farm days, your first line of defense is going to be your farm insurance or your small business insurance, your commercial general liability. It is a requirement to have those policies in place. Now, if your farm insurance provider is not accommodating the event, or they would prefer that you don't do the event, or they're asking you not to do the event, that's fine. That's what we're here for. We're here to be that contingent policy, and we will act as the primary policy in the event you can't find insurance, you're being denied coverage from your provider, or it's difficult for you to obtain insurance. But we do ask that you've at least made that attempt to find insurance for your event. So this policy protects all the farms that are registered under the Open Farm Days event, as well as the host organizations. So we arrange it on behalf of the group, and that's basically how we get the pricing down to a more affordable level. If you try to get coverage on your own, which you can do, you're looking at 5 to 10x the cost versus the pricing we're able to get on a group basis. So these are the common questions we get from our farms. Are the products that I'm offering covered by my farm insurance? Does my farm policy cover the small startup business that we're looking at doing? And if these are questions regarding your farm insurance, we're going to obviously direct you back to whoever's providing that policy for you. If it's with our office, certainly we can just transfer that call over. But or if you're looking for a quote, obviously we could do that as well. We get a lot of questions about farm machinery and rides. That unfortunately we can't insure under this event policy. It's just too high risk to do any sort of rides on farm animals or farm machinery or equipment. So anything from animals, wagons, sleigh rides, tractor demonstrations, anything where the guest is actively riding on or participating in the event is not insured under this policy. So if there is a demonstration of equipment, that's certainly fine, as long as it's a spectator involvement. So people that are simply viewing the activity or watching from a safe distance, obviously we have no concerns with that. And if there is an issue, a fire explosion, we had a situation where a vehicle was stuck and ended up trying to get unstuck and sprayed a bit of the crowd with gravel. So that's insured. That's an insurable event. But if we have people participating in the activities, that's not currently insured. So these are the two types of policies that you might want to take a look at. So the one on the right is what we're providing for open farm days. It's a short-term policy. Premiums are very affordable. It includes coverage for the basic operations of the event over the weekend, and we don't require a whole bunch of information from you. So there's no online portal that you have to go through. You don't really have to apply. As long as you're registered in the event, you're covered by this policy. So It's a very sophisticated process behind the scenes to gather some of this information and negotiate it on your behalf. But once you're registered, there's really nothing additional that needs to be done because the entire event is being insured by one insurance company. So here's a quick overview of what we're insuring under this policy. So all farms, host facilities participating in the open farm days, as long as you're registered. Again, that's obviously the key ingredient. So anytime there is an allegation of bodily injury or property damage up to $2 million, this policy will respond. Food and beverage sales, including host liquor liability, is included up to the full $2 million. I'm not going to get into any specifics. I think we've heard enough, of the specific requirements from AHS, and as long as you're compliant with the regulations set up by the governing authority, that's really all that the insurance companies are looking at. We don't have our own set of rules and regulations to follow. We will defer, obviously, to the experts. We're insurance folks, not food inspectors. So there's medical payments coverage as well. Medical payments would include any emergency patient transport, if we need to get people in an ambulance, or if there's any costs associated with providing emergency medical coverage, the insurance policy will respond to that. There is also tenants' legal liability. We haven't had any major need for this, but we do include it. If you're using a temporary space for the open farm days, if you're renting a space, or maybe using a neighbor's farm, anytime where your farm is actually becoming the tenant and using a space that you don't own, we do include coverage for you as a tenant. And this is more just to stay compliant. If there was one or two farms that were using a temporary space, then the policy automatically covers that. So what's not covered, what's excluded on the right-hand side there, if you haven't read it already, anything bouncy castles, trampolines, inflatable amusement devices, they're bouncy castles. And this is something we see all the time. They're a lot of fun. My kids use them. Unfortunately, they do result in injury. And if it is something that you have, just understand that any claims that come from one of those events or one of those devices will not be insured. Communicable diseases, COVID-19, obviously not covered, and BSC. So any bovine related communicable diseases are not insured under this policy. That's nothing unusual. This is a very common exclusion, but I do like to bring it up and talk about it just because of the potential interaction with beef cattle or dairy cattle, I guess. Mechanical rides, horseback riding, obviously we talked about that, are not covered. Any fireworks demonstrations, pyrotechnics are not insured, and the other exclusions are fairly standard. There's no coverage for abuse, terrorism, cyber, asbestos, or nuclear. So the next thing is just a few of the conditions we'll talk about that are required of you. So again, this might sound nitpicky, but it says all farms should carry farm or commercial general liability. If you can't carry it, or you can show us something that says, look, my farm provider said I can't get insurance for this event, or they don't like that we're doing this, that's fine. That meets the threshold. You've at least attempted to obtain insurance. That's what this policy is there for. If you are serving liquor, the only thing we ask is there must be at least one person with the ProServe certification. It's an online course that you can take. If you are getting a liquor license, there'll be some rules on that as well. And so this is separate from your liquor license. We are not providing you with a liquor license. You do need to stay compliant with the AGLC. So look into that if you're planning on serving liquor. And the only thing we require is, again, that at least one person has their ProServe. So all that you need to do to actually register for this insurance and get a copy of the policy, simple contact information. So we need the legal name of the farm. If it's not a legal name of a farm, if it's just a trade name, then it's just your individual first and last name, and then your contact information. We do need a physical mailing address. PO box is totally fine, and then contact, email, phone number. So that's really all that is required to qualify. And you don't need to send this directly to me. This is part of your registration. So if you're sending it to Tanis, She gets me a final copy. The one thing I would ask is to, make sure if you're on the fence, we need a couple business days prior to the start of the event to finalize that list. And there always seems to be, a few stragglers at the end. And if there is a last minute addition that doesn't make the cut, if you're not on that list, you won't be insured. So go through a few claims scenarios here. These are always fun. You can play along if you want. So an example, a visitor falls ill after leaving a farm and requires hospitalization. They allege the condition is due to food poisoning from a recently visited farm. So do we think that's insured or not? Yes, that's exactly what this policy is put in place for. Rider falls off a tractor ride and becomes injured. I think we talked about that already. No, uninsured. You can submit the claim, but you will get a declination from the insurance company for that. A horse spooks and kicks somebody, causing significant injuries. This is not a hypothetical. We've seen this. Sometimes they bite, sometimes they kick. We've seen cows just gradually walk into parked cars as well and cause property damage. And yes, that's exactly what this policy would respond to. This one might be a little bit concerning. A guest puts out a cigarette in a planter, which starts a fire. The barn and the home suffer significant fire damage. No one's injured and no other property is damaged. That's not insured. So if something like this was to happen, the reason this is not insured is because this is the farmer's owned property. So under a liability policy, it only covers damage or injuries to third parties. So anything that's owned by the farm is not insured by this policy. So any farm equipment, farm buildings that become damaged by guests are not insured under this. So this person should have their own farm insurance to respond to their damaged buildings. Overcrowded parking area leads to vehicles parking on the road, and a passing vehicle is involved in a car accident, and they allege a lack of traffic control is what contributed to the accident. This one would be a little bit complicated, but in the end, there would be insurance coverage for that. We would respond to this claim. Now, this is not an auto insurance policy. However, it's not a vehicle that we were involved with. It wasn't a vehicle owned by the farm. So the passing vehicle is what was damaged here, and they were involved in the claim. So there is coverage under this policy. I was actually happy to hear that there is some thought being put into parking and traffic control and the size of the space of that. It is a pretty big area of claims that we do see. So just have a plan for that. Have an overflow area. Have some signs. Have a bit of a plan to figure out exactly how you're going to manage traffic. And if you're expecting a surge, if we get a beautiful day, you could get some pretty significant numbers through your farms. So have a plan. If something goes wrong, terribly wrong, injuries relating to that traffic control, you do have insurance for the event. Again, this is just a last minute thing. A neighboring farm decides to open up their gates the day of the event, and they decide not to register as a host farm. Obviously, if you're not registered, there's no coverage there. So if you have other hypothetical claims, or if you're curious about something, you can stick it in the chat there, or unmute and ask the question. I can try to speculate how these claims might go, but that's a good summary of some of the typical things we get questions on.
Great, thank you, Perry. A couple of questions just from my side. So I know, and some people always have questions, so it's always good to address it. So I know a number of years ago, there was a case in Ontario where there was an overturned horse-drawn cart. So that is what prompted the change around equine, because initially that wasn't part of one of the exclusions. But the wagon pull is a new one. So can you just, because we do have a number of farms that have tractor pulls and all sorts of things like that. So can you kind of maybe elaborate a little bit on the reasoning and what the opportunities are around that?
Yeah, so this is something that we do see, and the insurance companies do change their minds every year. These policies are negotiated 90 days in advance of the event. So that's really, and these insurers are watching what's going through the courts, what's happening, and it's very difficult for us to make any sort of promises prior to that. It is a bit of a moving target. So things do change, and we may come up with a year where things are better and we can offer coverage for some of these events. But the idea being, we want to keep the coverage affordable. Of course, that's obviously top of mind. If there is a specific farm who really wants to do a specific event, fireworks, mechanical bulls, horse-drawn carriages, wagons, things like that. It's not that these are uninsurable, it's that they're not included at the price we've negotiated. So the insurance company does have a bit more of an application process to go through things like bouncy castles or horse-drawn sleigh rides, wagons, things like that. And they can be insured. They're just not something that we're able to offer on a blanket basis to this number of farms. So that's really the theory behind it. Because we're providing the coverage on a blanket basis, we can't agree to do that across the board. There's just not enough underwriting that we're getting information on who specifically is doing what, and there's often a bit of back and forth with the individual farm owner on their setup and what they're planning on doing. So it's just one of those things that it's deemed too risky to provide on a blanket basis.
Right. So I will say, so what we found last year when we sort of dug into it, a number of farms do bring in inflatables. And what we found is a lot of the companies that were providing the inflatables have coverage built into those rentals.
Right.
So that part certainly isn't an issue from a farming standpoint. And then the ones that do have things operated usually have some sort of insurance because they operate those kinds of things year round. So it's covered under their general insurance. So that's not an issue. The one thing that I would say is we have a lot of farms that will do wagon pulls. So those will be safe ways for people to get a wagon load of people out into a back pasture, sort of out to go see some bison where they don't want people wandering around in the enclosures, but they're happy to have them, kind of safe in a specific space that's geared for that. So we have a lot of farms that actually do incorporate tractor pulls of one kind or another. So I will see that we'll probably get a lot of questions on that for this year because it's something that has always been included. So I think that will be an area for a lot of questions for next year.
Yeah, and again, we will try to negotiate that at May when we can approach the insurer, and if we have a list of maybe the farms that are doing that might help with our underwriting process to say, look, we've got a list of maybe 15 or 20, or if it's more of them, then we might have to just say, you know what, we do need to include the wagon pulls in that. We'll be careful not to call them a tractor pull. That's usually more of an amusement type of activity where they're pulling the weighted sleds. So if it's a wagon pull and they're not pulling the like the high powered tractors type of thing.
Yeah, it's generally a wagon pull is what we see and what a lot of our farms are offering.
Yeah, and oftentimes it's the most efficient way. It's a safe way, and it's pretty slow moving. The injuries that we see from them are not generally like overturned carts or anything like that. It's usually people jumping on and off of the wagon. It's pretty slow moving, and people think it's fun, or kids think it's fun to jump on and off. And then if there is an injury and they decide that it's the fault of the farmer, that's the kind of claim we're trying to avoid. So I'll keep that in mind, that we'll try to push the insurer to make sure that we can extend, which is something that they've deemed it a mechanical ride at this point. So if we can get maybe a carve back for guest transport, then maybe we can get that in there. So I'll make a note on that on my end.
Okay, and I can get you some information. I've got pictures, and I will say that those activations that I've seen done have been done very well, where they're kind of safely loaded into that wagon, and you stay on it until either it does a complete loop or you get to your destination where people will go and then pick carrots or beets or do whatever, whatever that destination is. So it's typically very well run, but it is something that a lot of our farms use. We've got a question there that says, can we have a third party company come and give horse pulled wagon rides? So if you're using somebody offsite, are they covered under this policy as well? Or I would assume sometimes, if, like, let's say it's not like a company that offers that, but it's like a neighboring farm that is offering that service for the Open Farm Days event. So they're coming onto the property for the event for Open Farm Days.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. That would be the risk management side of things, is to have a third party provider come and do whatever it is that you're wanting them to do. So if it's the bouncy castle guy or the horse-drawn carriage, if it's a business, great. If it's a neighboring farm, the risk is that it's always better to have somebody else do that, because you're transferring the risk to that provider. Now, if that person doesn't have insurance, if they don't have adequate insurance, there's not necessarily going to be any coverage for your farm under their policy. So I can give you some language. It's basically, you want them to have their own insurance, but you also want your farm to be listed on their policy as an additional insured. That's the best way to guarantee that your farm would be insured under their policy. Now, if they just have their own insurance, a lot of these bouncy castle guys have coverage. They understand the rules. They understand what's required on setup and takedown, having somebody there supervising the bouncy castle while it's in use. They understand some of the warranties that are required. That's a great form of transferring the risk, because you've brought in a third party to do that. So if that's the case, then I wouldn't hesitate to have them come to your farm. And again, we're not telling you not to do these things. We're just saying that if something happens and you decide to do it on your own without having a third party vendor, that this policy won't cover it. So just know that the risk is there. You're taking the risk on your own. But yeah, a third party contractor coming in to do that. If it's a neighboring farm bringing his horses over in his wagon, you should ask for a copy of his farm insurance. That would be the best way to do that. And if he's told his farm insurance provider that he offers this service, then there shouldn't be any issue with that. But that would be the sort of the next step of having somebody else offer the service on your behalf, is to make sure that they have insurance. Just as if you were to hire, a plumber to fix your house, you would hope that plumber has insurance. And sometimes hope is not the best approach. You should actually ask for proof of it. Ask for a copy or a certificate of insurance is the standard approach.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so thank you. So I think what I will do is we can go back and forth a little bit, but I will do a description of some of those wagon pulls that we're talking about to see that opportunity around inclusion. For anyone that's listening to this now or at a later date, do take a look at this and look at your event, and feel free to reach out to us as we start to kind of finalize what those arrangements are. And the certificates usually come out. Our event is sort of mid-August, so you'll probably receive those towards the end of July. So, but if you've got questions in advance, we can obviously go through that and make sure that you've got all the right questions answered for anything that you're planning to do. Thank you so much, Perry. Appreciate you coming on and talking to us about it. And obviously it helps our farms to do their planning and to make sure that what they're doing is sort of between the lines, and make sure it's a successful event for everybody.
Thanks for having me.